Okay, so by this time, most of you or all of you have already heard of the fact that a few weeks ago there was a new discovery with regards to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We spoke about it in Shul on Shabbos a few weeks ago, and I want to dedicate this class and maybe some of the future classes to focus on the new material that we have. As well known that psychologically, although there are many sections of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that all of us have never studied before, but when you find out that there's a new passage of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that hasn't been studied in more than 100 years, and who knows how many people ever learned it, and the fact that it has been newly released, it's mo'ir to have a look and to have a peek. So we're gonna do that during this class, and maybe in a future class as well. Just the history of this is as follows. A few weeks ago, the library here put up many manuscripts online for the first time, and of these manuscripts, they included manuscripts that are housed locally here in the library, in the Rebbe's library, in the library of Agudas Chabad, but it also included manuscripts that over the years people said, by the way, the library in Eretz Yisrael has a manuscript that's Shayach to Chabad. So they went there. I don't know who, when, where, but where we know, but I don't know when and who, but they went there and they made a scan, and they had the library here had a scan on their computers. So this was a manuscript that's in the Shulchan library in Eretz Yisrael, and it's a Chabad manuscript. As many of these manuscripts are, they're not the way we would think of a book that is like organized. It says on the cover what it is, and then you open it inside. Yeah, that's the handout. And what it is, it's a miscellany. A miscellany means that Chassidim used to have this type of thing, and not only Chassidim. You have a book, you see something interesting, so you copy it down into your book. So your book could have 50, 100, 200 different texts in this type of book. That's how many letters were preserved. So there is this booklet there, and it has pages of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. It has pages. It's very random which pages, and it's clearly not all pages, and it's not entirely clear where these pages came from, who wrote them, why they wrote them. But the reality is that it was someone who copied the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch by hand, and he had seifim that were never appeared in print, that never appeared in print of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in all of its many different printings.
How do they know this from Alter Rebbe? It says on the top?
Yeah. So here I made just a few copies here. Here's a picture of one of the pages of the manuscripts for you to look at. First of all, it matches the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch word for word in all the other areas. It matches out. If you look at the top of this manuscript, you'll see it says Shulchan Aruch Admer. Okay, Shulchan Aruch Admer. Oira Chaim, that's the Rosh Tevis. The Hay is Hilchas, Beis HaKnesses, Kuf Nun Vav. And the text here matches perfectly one book and one book only, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, except for a few additions. And when we look at each one of the additions, we know right away what's happening, because every single one, if we know the history of censorship in Russia in the 1800s, and we know what bothered them and what they were careful about, every single one of these passages can be easily attributed to removal of the censorship, including the one that we're going to focus on today. So that's Hakdama number one. What's going to happen are they going to reprint Shulchan Aruch now with like these new passages? I don't know. But right now, someone in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Alashvili, is printing a kuntris that's going to have all the information, including background and his comments and commentary, and on this that will be coming out soon.
Does that become Aryam HaMelech script?
Aryam HaMelech? I don't know what that means.
Meaning to say what happened with the Yam HaMelech script.
Yeah, I hear you. We'll see what happens. The
Gemara, we kept the censorship for the most part. Whatever was cut was like passed out, no?
In the Gemara, you're saying things that were censored out have been remained out?
I mean, from your classes, they were put back in later or no?
So some yeah and some no. It's actually not so consistent. Yeah. Okay. This is a bigger question that relates to many Jewish books. It relates to Tanya as well, and many other Svarim where you have censorship or whether it should be changed or not. Okay. So that's Hakdama number one. Hakdama number two is the concept of Shittuf. Shittuf is a term I'm sure you've all heard of, because it comes up in the Maimarim especially in Maimorim and Halachic sources, but also, interestingly, it comes up in Kabbalah and Chassidus sources as well. What's Shittuf? The term Shittuf we use is when someone says, yeah, I believe in the Eibishter, and I believe the Eibishter controls the world, but I believe that he delegated some powers to some other entity. A classic case of Shittuf would be if you say the Eibishter controls the world, but by the way, he's been the sun. He gave the sun the choice whether to give light and heat or not, and the sun thinks about it and decides whether to do it or not. So you believe in the Beit Ha'olam, but we call this Shittuf, and the Maimorim talk about it. It comes up in Chassidus, the difference between Avodah Zarah and Shittuf. Avodah Zarah is denial of God, and Shittuf is something. Okay. Now, the Pashtus, when we read early Jewish literature, meaning Tanakh, Gemara, Chazal, all of the early sources, there is no middle ground. Either you're an Eved Avodah Zarah or you're not an Eved Avodah Zarah. There is no such a... But here, there's no carved out special space where here it's okay. There's no such a thing. Achdus Hashem, unity, believe in the true God that Avraham Avinu taught, that's emes, and everything else is sheker. And there's no chilukim. In Gemara, you're not going to find a Gemara that's going to say that a Yid must believe X, but a guy could believe differently about the Eibishter. There is no such Gemara, there is no such Medrash, there is no such Yerushalmi, there isn't any of the early sources that discuss this. And that is going to be the subject of today, because there was a big change that happened in this regard with the Ramah. The Ramah, writing in the 1500s, basing himself on earlier sources, which we're going to take a look at, and this is what the Alter Rebbe is going to be about. The Ramah introduced a change into how this is regarded, and Ad Hayom, this has major implications for how we regard Christianity, because Christianity believes in the Boire Shemayim V'Aretz and in the Noisin HaTorah, but they also are mishated. There's a concept of Shittuf there in their religion, where there is another entity, a Nivra, an entity who at least became a Nivra, but Al Kopanim, there's a concept of Shittuf there. But there's another entity that also has divine powers. And so the question of whether Shittuf is mutter for a guy or not is of huge importance and has very practical relevance to what's going on.
What does divine powers mean? We don't like say that certain tzaddikim have divine powers? I mean, what do you mean by divine powers?
Yeah, so you need to define the meaning of that. The idea that God, so to speak, delegated to him or to that entity to make decisions. So do we say that about a tzaddik? No, we say that a tzaddik has the ability to be poiled by the Eibishter, just like a regular Yid has the ability to be ma'eder or ratzon by the Eibishter, right? So a tzaddik even more has that power. But it's not that the power is delegated to the tzaddik.
When the tzaddik does miracles, or does...
When a tzaddik does miracles, what's the understanding of a tzaddik doing miracles? Is that the tzaddik was poiled by the Eibishter to do the miracle. We don't say that the tzaddik himself is poiled the thing. You see multiple times taka by the Rebbe where people were using that language, and the Rebbe is always saying it's the Eibishter. The Rebbe is always pointing out that it's the union of the Eibishter. I think that would be the distinction.
The Gem video that the Gem video they put out in the last dollars from one of these big rare kick evidence to the Yebracha, the child, and that point stuff.
Yeah, I didn't see
my
that.
saying came then that they say that he's on equal power, equal levels.
So here's the thing. I'm not a Christian theologian, so I hesitate to say what they say, you know what I mean? But it's the concept of a Trinity.
Consider him a God.
Yeah.
And we don't have any.
Right. Yeah.
Divine power.
Yeah. Correct. Worship and praying is so. One results on the other. Once you recognize that an entity has the power to be mashpia or not to be mashpia, that type of thing, so then it makes sense to pray to that entity, that person. Okay. So why was this conversation censored out? Because you're going to see this conversation of that Jews in Halacha in Shulchan Aruch should be talking about. This concept of Christianity was off limits in Russia, as we're going to see, and that's why the whole sif was taken out. Okay, so let's go. Yeah, we're gonna get there. We'll get there. I just wanted to give you these 2 points of background. Now let's work through the sources. We're going to have to do for a few minutes a little bit of hard work, but it's going to be worth it. Okay, sagt die Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis. Damar Avua de Shmuel. The father of Shmuel, who's quoted numerous times in the Gemara without his name, the father of the Amoira Shmuel said as follows: Asur la'adam sheyaseh shutfas in anachri. It is forbidden for a Jew to be a partner with a non-Jew in a business affair. Why? What's the problem? Shema yischayev lo shvua. Maybe the non-Jew is going to, in the course of the business partnership, is going to have to do a shvua. In other words, something is going to happen, and you're going to say, hey, you stole money, where did that money go, or something like that. And so now he's going to have to swear. He's obviously going to swear, invoking his avodah zarah, his foreign god, because that's how oaths are always taken. And that's a problem. The Torah tells a Yid, Lo Yisham Al Picha shouldn't be heard on your mouth, and Chazal Darshan, what's Lo Yisham Al Picha? And that you're not going to mention Avodah Zarah. Lo Yisham Al Picha is even if you're causing it, that you're going to cause the non-Jew to do a shvua b'shem his Avodah Zarah, that's off limits and that's unacceptable. Now, you hear the implications of this? You're telling Jews they can't go into a business partnership with a non-Jew? That's like, wow. Not only that, imagine someone, for whatever reason, is in a dispute with a non-Jew. All of a sudden, it becomes a halachic question. Am I allowed to even sue him? Because if I sue him to get my money that I think I rightfully own, he may do a shvua for his avodah zarah. So the economic and social implications of this din is quite radical.
Is this written in a place where Yidden all live together and that they can really live?
This was in Bavli. There was obviously a significant Jewish community there, but as far as we know, they lived amongst non-Jews too. But yes, in the Talmud Bavli, there are many dinim that sound restrictive for when you are a few Jews living on a block in a community with many non-Jews. And in fact, when you learn Gemara Avodah Zarah, you'll see there are many different dinim of things you're not allowed to do for Avodah Zarah. You're not allowed to buy this for them. You're not allowed to sell this. You're not allowed to do this. When you learn that Gemara with Tosfos, you'll see there's a common theme in the Tosfos. Tosfos giving Heteirim for all these things that the Gemara gives the Isser for. Why? Because the Yidden in Ashkenaz in the time of Tosfos, in the 1200s and the 1300s, they were small communities, a few dozen mishpachas in these different communities. They were embedded in the economy and the social life of these communities, and it was almost impossible for them to keep these dinim. And so they explored whether they were still binding on them. Now, what do you mean? Why would it not be binding on them? So these are all dinim derabanan. So in each case, it says that we have to really see if this din applies in our time and in our place. And that's what happened over here, what we're going to learn now. Because the Baalei HaTosfos looked at this din, and they said, you know something? The Isser to go into a partnership with a Goy, because maybe you're going to cause him to swear his Avodah Zarah, it doesn't apply to us in our time and our place. Now this is quoted 2 times by the Tosfos, but the clearest source that has the clearest language is the Rosh, who is a member of the Baalei HaTosfos, and he's a Posek, so we're going to learn the heter that the Rosh provided. So the Rosh says as follows: we have a heter today to go into a partnership with non-Jews. Why? Or alehus, I'm not sure how to read the word here. Because when they do oaths, they swear in the name of their saints. Christians have a long list of saints, and they swear in their saints, by the name of their saints, and they don't regard their saints as deities. The various saints that they have, the famous one for us, because it's on the calendar, is because Valentine's Day, right? So he's a Christian saint, right? Which is one of the reasons. But they don't regard their saints as gods, and so therefore, no problem. However, there is a problem. How could you say they're only swearing by saints, which aren't gods? The reality is that they mention God and the saints. The text of the medieval oath, when something is said, I swear by the Lord or whatever, and by the saints. That was the text. So, So maskinu shein shamayim, not only maskinu shein shamayim, so they are mentioning God. The chavanasam ledavar acher, and when they say God, they mean a davar acher. What's davar acher? Yeshu. Davar acher is Yeshu. How do I know? Because Rabbeinu Yerucham, who quotes the same thing, says it. So a davar acher, we'll see that in a second. Davar acher is Yeshu. So although they're mentioning God, and when they're mentioning God, they're thinking Yeshu, so l'choira, there is a problem with the oath. Don't tell me saints, because they're saying God and thinking Yeshu. Mikol makom, nonetheless, it's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? Because ein maskirim shem avodah zara. They're not mentioning his name. They're not mentioning his name. They don't mention his name. They're thinking it, but they say God, they say Lord, ein maskirim shem avodah zara. V'gam, moreover, daitam la'ois shemaim v'aretz. And not only that, but I think the right way to read this is v'daitam gam. I think that's how you read it. La'ois shemaim v'aretz. They're thinking about God. They're thinking about God together with someone else. So there's two things to consider here. Number one, they're not saying anything. They're not saying Yeshu. No, they're not saying it. They're thinking him. Yeah, but they're not only thinking him, exclusive him. They're thinking God and him, and they're not saying it. So therefore, it's not an issue, and therefore the issue, lo yishama al picha, is that if the guy would say, I swear by the name of Baal or whatever it is, they have a problem. But here, they're not saying it. They're saying, I swear in the name of the Lord. Saints is, we already said it's not an issue. When they say God, they say God. They're thinking God. Okay, they're also thinking about something else. Okay, so that's not an isser of lo yishama al picha. It's not an isser. Okay, then the Rosh continues. They're being mishatev shem shamayim v'davar acher. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is, there's two ways of how to read this paragraph, and I'm going to strongly bias you in the direction that is b'pashtus what the Rosh's original intent was, and only later we'll come back to an alternative meaning. Where the Chazal use this term, mishatev shem shamayim v'davar acher. This is where it gets tricky. There's a concept in Chazal of shituf. There's a term, shituf. As we said before, that's when you say there's an entity that's a deity. Other than the Melech Malach Allah and Kodesh Baruch Hu, that's called shituf. However, there's other Gemaras that use the term when someone is mishatev shem shamayim v'davar acher. What does that mean? That is not talking about when you make something a deity. It's not talking about that. What is it? It's when you say something, you give even honor to God, and you include something in the same sentence, even if no one thinks that you have in mind to bestow it with powers of a God, but the very fact that you mentioned it together is called shituf shem shamayim v'davar acher. Let me show you where this comes up in Chazal, and then we'll come back to the Rosh. Go to Chela Gimel on the left column, where you see text 4, you see the Rambam, Hilchos Shavuos. Look what the Rambam says. Asur lishava v'davar acher im shmoi. When you take an oath, you're not allowed to say, I take an oath in God, and also in the power of, forget power. I take an oath in God and in a tzaddik. Right? I swear in the name of God. Not that I think that he's a God or anything like that. It doesn't matter. Even without saying that he's a deity, you're not allowed to mention in the same sentence God. You're not allowed to do that. Whoever does this, whoever links God with another thing while taking oath, Neker min Olam is going to have a terrible death. Tosfos and Saita says that Neker min Olam means a misa mishuna. There's only one person who we should be taking the oath for, so don't include those other things. The Rambam is basing it on the Gemara. Here the Gemara is using the concept of shituf shem shamayim v'davar acher to the idea of mentioning another thing together with God, even without attributing to that other thing the powers of a deity. Let's look at another example in Mishnah Sukkah that my son just called my attention to a few days ago. It describes there the Hoshana Rabbah, what we call today Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot, when they brought their Arava to the Mizbeach, and the Mishnah says as follows: B'shas p'tiras on my oimrim. What do they leave? What do they when they're leaving? What do they say when they're leaving after the whole service, the elaborate service on the last day of Sukkot? So one shitta says they say Yoifi Lach Mizbeach, Yoifi Lach Mizbeach. They praise the beauty of the Mizbeach that they just circled. Rabbi Elazar Omer, they say Leka Ulecha Mizbeach, which means Rashi tells us this means Leka Ulecha Mizbeach. It means we are doing this big honor of celebrating for you God and for you the Mizbeach. Okay? So they're saying, we did this whole thing, the festival with Aruch, and we circled it. We're doing it for your honor and for the Mizbeach's honor. Fragt the Gemara on this Mishnah, you're linking God with something else. The Tanya and the Brisa says, because it says only Ebishur Levadoi, and from there we derive this special din, special din, that we don't praise God and in the same sentence praise a human or some other thing, in this case a building, the Mizbeach. Not okay. And for the Gemara, this is what they meant. We submit to Hashem, and the Mizbeach we praise. So we submit to God, and it's another term for kilus, for praise. So somehow, even though they didn't verbalize it, but the fact that they intended, now it's two sentences. To you, one subject, one predicate. To you, one subject, predicate. To you, another subject, predicate. So in other words, to you, one thing, to you, another thing. That's enough of a distinction where you're not being Meshater Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher. In all of these sources, in 4, 5, and 6, this whole discussion is not a discussion about, with the classic term of shittul. It's not a discussion of, are you allowed to give it powers of a deity? Are you allowed to worship it or not? That's not the discussion. The discussion is, are you allowed to, while you're praising God or talking about God or giving oath to God, are you allowed to invoke something else? This is called L'shatef Shem Shamayim L'im Davar Acher. Now back to the Rosh. V'av Obi Shem Ishtatzvin Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher. What's Tosfos' problem here? Tosfos' problem is, okay, you solved the issue of Avodah Zarah. There's no issue of Avodah Zarah. Why is there no issue of Avodah Zarah? Because again, they're saying saints. B'negei God, they're saying God. And they mean God. Okay, they're having in mind something else on the side. Fine. But Mishachi, what's the Mishtat in Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher? They're saying God and the saints. They're saying God and the saints. So they're saying God and the saints. That's being Mishater Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher. So we say, it's not ideal that they're doing that. You're not allowed to do it. There is no Isser, even for a Yid, to be goyim another Yid to do it. There is no unique Isser al Kopanim. At least under the pasuk of Lo Yishama Al Picha, not Lo Yishama Al Picha, but if you look at Hilchis, Shituf Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher, you're not going to find that there's an Isser if you're goyim. That's it. So therefore, not a problem. There is a general concept of Lifnei Iver. So even if you're going to tell me there isn't a specific din in Hilchos, Shituf Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher, that says you're not allowed to, but we know, generally speaking, you're not allowed to cause someone else to do an Isser, there's no issue with that either. Why? Because Goyim aren't commanded in this. What? In Shituf Shem Shamayim V'Davar Acher. So what is the Rosh telling us? The idea that you could say, I take an oath in God and in the saints. That's not usher for them to do. The fact that they say God and the saints, that's not usher for them to do. They're putting it in the same sentence. For a Yid, it's not okay. For a Goy, it is okay. And this is the Rosh, and this is the heter that they had, which is why it was okay for them to enter partnerships with non-Jews in the time of the Tosfos. Again, you have two Tosfos in that says this. The Rosh says this, and Rabbeinu Yerucham says this as well. Lo Yishama Al Picha is that you're not allowed to cause a Goy to swear in his Avodah Zarah. But that's not happening here. Because there's no verbalization of Avodah Zarah that's happening. What's happening is that he's thinking Avodah Zarah when he says the name God, and the Rosh doesn't think that's a problem. So do you have Chidushim here in this Rosh? Absolutely. You have Chidushim here.
This idea that the Gam died from Lo Yishma words, is that assumed, or is that a given? I mean, how do we know that, and how do we apply? How do we know how to apply it and when to apply it?
They knew who they were talking about. They knew the community that they were dealing with. They knew the rudiments of Christianity, and they knew that to say God, they mean the Beirut Shemayim V'Aretz. It's not like in Talmudic times. Talmud Bavli is created in the Zoroastrian environment. So there is the rain god and the wind god and the god of fertility and the god of all these things, and so people are worshiping any one of these at any given moment. So the Tosfos know enough that the reality of Avodah Zarah that they're living in is different enough from that. So you do have Chidushim here in the Rosh. You do have Heterim over here. The fact that they're thinking about Yeshu Anoisri, okay, fine. That's not a Lo Yishama Al Picha problem. Doesn't say it's mutter. He doesn't say it's okay for them. It's not a look that you guide him, you cause that through a shvuah. not appeased, not saying it, it's in his head. Lo yishama, not an issue. He's saying saints together with God for a goy it's mutter. So you have chidushim here, you have a tatum here. But let's talk about what you don't have in the way I just read it. To come along and to say that a goy, is allowed to believe that the Eibishter delegated powers to the sun or the moon or to a certain human being or whatever it is, and that's mutter because you don't have that. You don't have that whatsoever in the text that we just read it in the way that I read it to you. Okay. Rabbeinu Yerucham says the same thing as the Rosh. Rabbeinu Yerucham is not so well known, but he's a very important addition. He lived at the same time as the Rosh, the late 1200s, early 1300s. And he basically says the same thing. We might as well just read it inside. At the minimum, it will be a chazara for what we just saw, and we'll see some additional language that we didn't have in the Rosh. Zakter, v'chasav ri, he attributes this to the ri, Rabbeinu Yitzchak, the person who's always quoted in the Tosfos. Ki yesh heter echad b'zman hazeh. We have a heter for why we're allowed to enter partnerships with non-Jews today. Why? Ki nishboim b'katshis shalahem. They swear by their saints. Hanikra avoin gilyon. Okay, this is an interesting word, avoin gilyon. You're probably familiar with the word evangelical. Evangelical is the Greek word for the Torah Chadasha that the Chas v'Shalom that they created, which means in English it means Psura Torah, Evangelion. Chazal knew that word. The Evangelion means the New Testament, and they punned avoin gilyon, avoin as in a sin. They turned it into a pun. Aven also can mean evil. So they punned. There's actually a Gemara that has one punned it as Avoin Gilyon with an aleph, the other one did it with an ayin. Because they were having fun with this. So here it's saying, Kinishban Bekachlam Hanikra Avoin Gilyon. I think what he means, the saints who are mentioned in the New Testament. I think that's what he means. Okay. They don't deem these saints as God. Okay. Although they are mentioning God, here you see not davar acher. Here you see clearly. Fine. At the end of the day, they don't mention his name. And in their mind, they're also thinking about God. So we think this is generally okay. That there's a different issue of Shem Shamayim v'davar acher. There's no issue in you being goyim as a din prati. Not a problem. Why? Okay, here the ending could get tricky. What does he mean by lo'huzu b'neach al hashituf? Rosh said lo'huzu b'neach al kach. What's kach? I've been translating kach means shituf shem shamayim v'davar acher. He uses loy hazmanei noach al hashituf. I will argue, many of the places say, what he means here is same thing. Shituf shem shamayim v'davar acher. He doesn't mean the other shituf. That's not what he's talking about. Okay. Now, who told us that this is the right way to read the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yerucham or whatever it is? It's many different poskim. One of them is the Machzis HaShakel. The Machzis HaShakel wrote a commentary on the Magen Avram. You see in footnote 3 on the bottom left, his name was Reb Shmuel Halevi Kellen, who lived from 1724 to 1806, roughly the time of the Alter Rebbe. And in number 7, he tells you, and we're not going to read it inside, in number 7, he tells you that the way we read...
He lives in Russia?
Yeah, Central Europe. I think he lives further. I think he lived west, more in Central Europe. Okay. So he tells us that the way we read text 2 and 3 is the correct reading of this passage. Now let's come to the Ramah on page number 2. This is the Ramah on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Kuf Nun Vav Aleph. It's going to be very clear that the Ramah is paraphrasing this Rosh, or this Rabbeinu Yerucham, or this Tosfos, this two Tosfos, and he's quoting one of these 4 sources. These are the 4 sources. The Ramah is quoting them. However, he rewrites the whole thing in such a way that basically says something entirely different. Let's read. There are those who think, that are makel, and say that it is okay to enter a partnership with kusim. That's obviously censorship. The Shulchan Aruch was printed lechatchila censored. In other words, Shulchan Aruch was printed the first time in the 1560s. That's after the big, in Italy, the big censorship happened in the years prior to that. Used to say here, goyim or something like that. Why is it okay? Because they don't take oaths, they don't do idolatrous oaths. Okay, what does that mean? What does it mean they don't do idolatrous oaths? What does that mean? Okay, let's continue. They do. They do. Maskirin ha'avodah zarah. It's not. We didn't have that in those earlier sources. They mention the avodah zarah. What they mean is, although they don't say it, what they mean is kavanasam l'oitza shemayim v'aretz. They really mean God. Ella, either saying Yeshu, mishatchin shein shemayim v'davar acher. So they're mentioning Yeshu, they're adding him to God. And for the Jew to cause him to say Yeshu together with God isn't a problem of Livnei Iver. Why? Because they're not commanded against this shittuf of saying Yeshu HaNoitzri together with God.
It's a very strong assumption to say that they're for sure having in mind God.
Okay, one second. It's a good question, but let's focus on the distinction between what the Ramah is saying and what we had before. Let's circle back to that in a second. You see the distinction? You're noticing the difference? What you have here is the Ramah is using the same sentences that were fashioned by the Balei HaTosfos before him, but he truncates it and he changes it. We're not talking about a Gemara in Sukkah about Shituf Shem Shemayim v'Davar Acher that you mentioned them as Be'ach together with God. That's not what we're talking about here. He's like, they don't mean Avodah Zarah. They say Avodah Zarah, yeah, but they mean God. They're only adding Yeshu. Nu doch Shituf. A guy is mutter to do Shituf. Oh, guys want to do shituf. So what comes out from here? That if a guy in the time of Avraham Avinu was saying, Avraham Avinu, you're right, I agree with you, everything about the Eibusher. But you should know the sun and the moon and another chveis, whole bunch of entities, they have power, they make decisions too, because the Eibusher gave them the power to do that. And other than that, the Eibusher is in control of everything else. So then Avraham would tell the guy, based on this, okay, you're ben noyach and amuzar ala shituf. That's what is emerging from this Ramah. It's a pella, because the Ramah doesn't have any earlier source. As I said before, there is no earlier source that tells you that there's these types of distinctions. The Ramah is clearly basing it on these texts, but he's doing something very different than what those texts were doing.
It seems like they start to say Yeshu when they're assuring. In the previous text, it seemed like it didn't include Yeshu's name.
Correct.
And now they are.
Correct, because he says Avav kav de maskirin avodah zarah. And the third line, the Ramah says Avav kav de maskirin avodah zarah, even though they're saying it, and the other ones imply that they're not saying it.
You only mentioned the same.
They said Avav b'shemaskirin shein shamayim v'kavanasam. Yeah, he definitely changed it. He changed it in that way. So he takes it as a given that they are making an oath and they are saying they are mentioning Yeshu in their oath. He's saying, taking it as a given, that they mean not just him, but they mean God. Again, that's based on his information and the familiarity that he had in Catholic Poland in the 16th century or whatever it is.
It could be also in that region they had a different terminology.
Also possible. Is he making also possible? So that would account for the first difference. But the main difference is he now says they're thinking God, they're saying Yeshu, no big deal that they added him to the equation because I listen to Ivra, you're goyim it. Nah, not a problem. Okay, now, let's look at the Rambam. The Rambam, we're going to do a diuk in the Rambam that maybe it sounds like the Ramah a little. Zok the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos. He's talking about Achdus Hashem. We need to believe in the unity of God. That's the pasuk. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The whole pasuk is all about Achdus Hashem. Then the Rambam adds the following interesting paragraph. Uveroiv hamidrashos. In many midrashim, you'll find Timseim Oimrim. You'll find them say that Hashem gave you the following mitzvah: Amanas liyachid eshmi, so that you will do Achdus Hashem. Amanas liyachdeni. There's various times it says you got this mitzvah, in order that you should make Achdus Hashem in this world. V'rabim ke'ila. What's going on over here? Why is Hashem saying that you have this mitzvah in order to bring Achdus Hashem? What Chazal wanted to teach here is Anachnu Annam Hoitzianu Me'avdus. We were taken out of slavery. V'asa imanu ma she'asa min hachasadim v'atoves, and God did to us many favors. Al t'nai, on condition of Hamanas hayichud. believing in the unity of God, that we're obligated to do. So look at this Rambam. What does this sound like? He's talking. Chazal say, I took you out of Mitzrayim and gave you mitzvahs on condition that you have my emunas yichud Hashem. Okay, good. So it's only relevant to Yidden. So comes along the Tzemach Tzedek and Derech Mitzvah Secha, and look what he said. Va'amuva midvarav. If you read this Rambam, what's understood from here is shemitzvah zu miyuchedes elenu dafke. The mitzvah of yichud, and that is the unity of God, meaning that He didn't give the power to something else. That's elenu. Mashenke bnei Noach ein muzar mal shutuf. He reads it in the Rambam. Which, this is important because some people are bothered by the Ramah, and so they try to type that that's not what the Ramah means. You see, Tzemach Tzedek's not accepting that. Tzemach Tzedek takes the Ramah at face value. The Ramah means what he means, but he even goes so far as to say it's a Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs. It's a huge chiddush. Why is it a huge chiddush? The Rambam in Mishnah Torah paskins clearly, and he says, "Noitzrim oivdei avodah zarah." It was censored out the word. Instead of Noitzrim, it said Adumim, which is Edom, which is Rome, which is Christianity. And he says the dinim that the Gemara says about how you treat an idolater applies befedish to Noitzrim. So clearly, it makes it a little difficult. The Rebbe wrote Tzarechiyun. How do you say that in Sefer HaMitzvahs he really means that, if in Mishnah Torah he said that? There's another way to read the Sefer HaMitzvahs. You could just say that there are things that you sometimes say, Almanas Cain, I took you out of Mitzrayim. So that means that specific thing can't happen for a goy. Maybe if you look, you'll find those examples could be shy for a goy as well. Okay, for a goy, I created you, Almanas, to have it without you see us Mitzrayim. Okay, Al Kapanim, here you have this Ramah and this way of looking at the Ramah. Now came along later commentators and disagreed with the Ramah and said, this is wrong. They said this is wrong. This is the Maimer that it's interesting. The Alter Rebbe in Chassidus, in all the Maimarim that I so far I was able to see, doing word searches, does not discuss this issue. Does not discuss, or Bnei Noach Muzar on Shittof or not, is not discussed by Alter Rebbe or the Mitzvah Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek mentions this one line here in Mitzvah Achtas Hashem and doesn't do any more elaboration. Then comes the Rebbe Marash. And the Rebbe Marash talks about this again and again and again and again. In the Maimer Micha Moicha is one of the famous places where he discusses this. And he brings it, and look, it's like in a Maimer. In the Pnim of a Maimer, which is very uncommon to have these type of Maram Mekoimis. The Rebbe Marash writes, brings the Ramah, and then he writes, Avo b'tshuvas v'shava koyin siman lamed aleph. The Shava Koyin, I don't remember, his name was Rebbe Rafal. He was the Rav in Hamburg and associated communities in the 1800s, early 1800s. Uvetshuva Shar Ephraim, we'll see him in a second. Nachlaku alav, they disagreed. V'sidr land the Ben Noach, Muzhanim al Shituf. Of course, a Ben Noach is Muzhar al Shituf. Let's read the Shar Ephraim. The Shar Ephraim is Ephraim ben Yaakov HaKoyin. He lives in the 1600s, and he was a student, as we'll soon see, of the Chelkas Mechoike. Look what he writes here. Hinei ra'isi rabim toyim b'pirush zeh. I've seen many people make a mistake. They think Goyim are Muzar al Shituf, which would mean that would mean for the Avodah Zarah, where they believe there's three parts of God, Christianity, the concept of a Trinity, the kosher. Learn the Rambam Hilchos Malachim, learn the Sman, and learn all their sources. Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, Moshe Kutzi. You're not going to find any pasuk before the Ramah saying that a goy is allowed to do shituf. It says, anything that a bezdin shal Yisrael kills a yid for doing, a goy is not allowed to do it. In other words, there is no daylight between what a Jew is allowed to do and a goy is allowed to do. Another problem. Why does it make sense for a Jew to be different in this regard? Avodah, the whole thing of it, what's Avodah Zarah? You need to have a proper conception about what God is in this world. That's what the mitzvah of Avodah Zarah is. Otherwise you say, Ma'echpat, what's the big deal if you're bringing Toitus to this guy, you're bringing... No. The Eibusher says you need to have a proper conception of what my relationship with this world is and what's going on. So, good. So, why is it okay all of a sudden to have shittul? It doesn't make any sense. Between a Yid and a Goy, says a Shar Ephraim. And then he goes to say, what is the pshat of Taisus and Aruch and the Poskim? And he tells it to you the way I read it to you, which is the same way the Machzis HaShekel read it to you, and that's the way he reads it into the previous source. At the end, he says, V'chein kabaltu mimoidi agoin, Moireinu harav Reb Moshe of Bezin the Kilas Kedesh Vilna, who was the Mechaber of the Chalkas Mechoikan on the Shulchan Aruch, who lived in Vilna, and that's a very important name, not only of the Shara Ephraim, to have the Chalkas Mechoikik on the side, together with the Machzis HaShekel, all these places saying that this is the right way to read. The whole question of shit over there was, is it kosher for a goy to mention saints when they are doing a kosher shvuah to God, which is kosher because they're only having in mind and they're not verbalizing, so for shvuah is not a problem type of thing. Okay, this brings us to the keta from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. That is this keta over here. It starts, if you're interested over here, 3 lines from the top on the right hand side. And this, if you open our Shulchan Aruch Alter Rebbe, it's not there. This keta is not there. It says Alter Rebbe as follows: V'yizhar im hanochi. You should be careful about going into shutfus with a non-Jew. Why? Okay, good. So he says the din. Then he says, and now we're makel. That's a stronger lashon than the Rama. The Rama only said v'yesh makilin. The Rama said, the Alter Rebbe says, that we now know, v'achshav noagu lahakil b'zeh. Why? Lefi sha'anochlim shalanu shebiyameinu unzere goyim. I love that lashon. Unzere goyim sha'anochlim shalanu shebiyameinu einam nishboim ba'aved zar. That's like the Rama. They don't do aved. They don't do idolatrous oaths. How could you say that? As the Rama said, they do. Sha'av shemaskidim shem aved zara. They're thinking about God. They're mentioning Yeshu. So they're adding God with another thing. That's not a big deal. You don't have why. Exactly like the Rama. Exactly like the Rama. Not like the Shara Ephraim, not like the Chalkas Mechoiking, not like the Machzis HaShekel, not like all those people who said that Rama had a wrong reading in the earlier sources. No, the Alter Rebbe is extremely comfortable giving verbatim pretty much what the Rama said. And then he goes...
10 years later.
The Alter Rebbe.
Yeah. Mamish, 210 years later.
And then he continues and says, to do business with them without a partnership, as long as it's not on the day of their holiday, which gets into another issue about doing business with a Gentile on a holiday, which is another subject that we don't need to get into. And this is what happens, this is the background to what happens. The Rebbe Marash brings us machlekes in the Maimorim, and the Rebbe Rashab, he does it a few times. The Rebbe Rashab had a Maimor where he does it, the Fidik Rebbe does it, and then the Rebbe does it. And this again is Chassidus, where you basically end up having Maimorim that say, B'nei Noach einu muzharim ala shituf. And the reason for it is, and it goes to explain how Chassidus, what's the difference between Avodah Zarah and Shituf. Avodah Zarah is, there's no God. Or there is a God, but Osav Hashem Etzart, he's not involved in what goes on in this world. And so therefore you can't believe in Matan Torah, you can't believe in Schar V'Oinish, that's Avodah Zarah. Shituf is, you believe in God, created the world, creates the world, involved in the world, Schar V'Oinish, Torah and all that, but he gave some powers, whatever, and that's lesser offense, and many of them are discussed, that a guy is allowed to have that thing. The Rebbe, when he published the Maimer, the Fidik Rebbe that does this, he published it with a note. And the note, ha'ara on the bottom, and Tafshin Yud Beis, and the note gets, he didn't have the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, but he says, see the Rama, see the Shara Ephraim, see the Machzis HaShekel, see, and other sources. By the way, this is it's a huge rabbinic discussion in the 1800s, following the Rama. Many people weighed in, this is just the basics and the gist of it, and the Rebbe is Messiah to all those sources. And then in Maimorim, and Sichis, very often you have this type of language, that there's a machlokes. And there's the text seems to say, but the guy in Chassidus seems to go with that they're not Mitzuv on it. That's the guy. That they're not, yeah. That seems to be the guy. Okay. But what I want to do now, if we...
Are they not allowed to be saying according to this?
That they're...
According to this, because they're what? They're not allowed to...
The Maimorim in Chassidus seem to have a bias toward the view that it's mutter for them to be Meshatev Shem Shemayim. Which, as I said, do shittul has major implications, because all of a sudden is a church a Beit Avodah Zarah. You know how many implications that has in halacha? For example, let's look at, without getting into in Eretz Yisrael, is it a problem that there's a church or not? So if you say that shituf is mutter for them, so then maybe it's not awesome, right? Is it mutter for a yid to go into a church, not to worship, but to look around, right? So a mosque is a lot more kal. So is this like a mosque all of a sudden? The implications here are huge. They're vast. You could enumerate many, and we'll see, because it gets into the Rebbe gets Lamaisa. That's the next section. I want to show you what the Rebbe did Lamaisa about.
Can you point to something, I don't know, where this change happened? Used to be meaning, I don't know, maybe 400, 500 years before, the Rebbe says this. Now, unsere Goyim don't believe what they used to believe.
I don't think so. I don't think so. That's not there is a parallel discussion to all of this that already starts for other inyanim in Masechta Avodah Zarah, where they say, our Goyim today, they're not such strong believers, so you don't have to be choshesh. You have that. And that trickles down, Lo'erech HaDoros, and Poskin said it, and that's a historical question to say, okay, how devout were Christians? But that's not the issue here. Here the question is, are they obligated in negating shituf or not? That's an internally Jewish question. And what you find is that all of a sudden in the 1500s, we have a source basing itself on earlier sources that says suddenly no. So that doesn't, in my view, reflect a change in the outside Christian world. That's something that happened internally in Jewish sources. I don't.
Well, if Kavanatum was Laved Zara, then it would be a problem.
The Ramah says Kavanatum is Laved Zara.
In
addition to, it's a given. What's Shan the Ramah? There, Afagav. You go up one line. You're in the Alter Rebbe or the Ramah? Same lashon. Sh'av shemaskirim shem Avodah Zarah. What's that? Yeshu. They're saying it. So they're saying it. Kavanasam la'isish ma'or. They mean God. But what do you mean? They're saying Yashka. Okay. Shemishtats and shem shemayim and davar acher. They're adding it together. They're doing shituf. So they mean both. They mean both. And that's why, because otherwise, why do you say Bnei Noach and Muzar al Shituf? Just say, there's no Isser. What are they doing wrong? They just use wrong words. But really, they meant Malach Machal Kadosh Baruch Hu. So just like son today, we say G-O-D. So we say G-O-D. Well, the G is not holy, O is not holy, D is not holy. But what do we mean? We mean, so say the same thing. They say G-J-E-S-U-S. But really, they mean Malach Machal Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's not a Shaila. No, don't say that. He says that Shituf is mutter. Why? Because they're saying it. And of course they say it. They mean it on some level. No, but then, his heter is a shituf heter. It's not they don't believe in it type of heter. That's how I'm reading these passages here.
Why would it be censored?
Why would this be censored? Look, you can say it's nice. It's nice.
He does say, even though they mention Avodah Zarah, maybe that part is
He's saying nice things about them, that they're not able to. The answer is very simple. Then you're going to tell us what we're allowed to believe? You're going to tell us what we're allowed to believe out of the question. These conversations were usher in Tsarist Russia. You couldn't even have put this conversation in print. What we're allowed to believe, yeah, no, this. We tell you what you could believe, not the other way around. So this is why this was censored out.
I thought the Kavanah from Lois Shemayim is like they don't really believe what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't think that's the pshat.
There were parts which were written and changed to say for a convert that from a distance.
Yeah. That's other parts of the censorship in Kufr and Vav. The other big parts are Avos Yisrael and conversion, and I'm interested in looking at those in some future classes. Okay, now let's look at material from the Rebbe on this. On the one hand, you have examples where the Rebbe is miyachis and gives credence to the heter of the Ramah, that there is no issue of shittul for a guy, and it's totally fine what they're doing. So let's give you the background. In 1961, there was a big issue in the Jewish community at the time, was funding for private schools. The Rebbe was a very big advocate that the American government should be funding private schools. The established Jewish community, meaning the American Jewish Committee and the Council and the federations and all these things, and Ad Hayoim, they're against it. And they're against it for many different reasons. For example, separation of church and state, which the Rebbe addressed in the Sikha, but is not relevant to us. But one of the things they said is, they said, if you're going to take money to Oli Torah and Lubavitch Yeshiva and Talmud Torahs and all these different schools, money's also going to go to Christian schools. And if you're going to have money going to Christian schools, so now you're supporting Avodah Zarah. So listen here, listen to Mishal. So the Rebbe responded in this multiple points. And one of the things that the Rebbe said is, first, the Rambam says that Evdei Avodah Zarah, but Ladas Kama Rishonim V'chein Pasak Arama Lo Huzu B'Nei Chal HaShituf. There's not an issue here. Okay? So the Rebbe takes it seriously enough to say that there's no issue. Listen to Mishal, that you caused the guy to go to a cloister, a church, to do his thing.
And there's the encouragement.
Then the Rebbe goes on and says further, and it's just interesting, in Dalid, the Rebbe says, so what's the alternative? The alternative is, we're going to have public schools that have no religion. So the Rebbe says, Kfira is worse than Avodah Zarah. Kfira is worse than He brings from a Baal Shem Tov that says, a guy who's Eved Avodah Zarah is better than a kofer. A kofer means you deny anything. It's an amazing thing, because Avodah Zarah is the worst Isser. And to say, but you know what's worse than that? Complete denial of God is even worse than that. It says it in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, there's a Maisa that say about the Baal Shem Tov that once he was on a wagon, I don't know the source of the story, and a non-Jew didn't cross himself. And he said, I'm off this wagon. Because there, they crossed themselves. When you pass a church. You pass a church, they would cross. That was the meaning. He didn't cross himself, the Baal Shem Tov.
They still do it.
They still do it. Okay? They're very aduk.
Not everyone.
There's another Maisa that he saw a cross in the ice, and he said, "Vus is kalt kan sein kfira." Okay, that's one example. Then this is 1961. Then it came back with moment of silence again. In 1983, the Rebbe then said for the first time that instead of all these years, 60s, 70s, the Rebbe advocated that there should be a prayer in schools that's neutral, a non-denominational prayer. In 1983, for whatever reason, the Rebbe said, "Okay, that's not happening. Moment of silence." The Rebbe started pushing the concept of moment of silence. Of course, people came out against it. One of the reasons, a kid's going to go to his mother, say, what should I think? Mother's going to say, think about Yeshu Anoshri. Now you were just guiding Avodah Zarah. So the Rebbe spoke about this on Shabbos Parsha Shmini, Tovshim and Gimel, and the Rebbe then quoted the Shitta of the Ramah. If you look at the top on number Aleph, on page Mefurish, Baramah, Erechaim, Soisim, and Kuf Navav, and the Rebbe quoted the din of the Ramah. The Rebbe then added of Yesh L'Hoisiv, which is more, I think, Mati, what you were saying, that the whole concept of these Christian beliefs of the Trinity is a very difficult thing. The Rebbe says theologically difficult. The Rebbe, I took out some of the Oishit here. Even their biggest theologians, some of them have given up on explaining it. So the average Christian is not really going to think about it, and it's a chashash that it's even going to come up with. It's an amazing thing. Because I don't know, I've heard interviews of like sports players after a game, and they'll say, "I thank the Lord," and they'll mention that entity. So, but the Rebbe is saying at least the chashash is less because of that. But that's in addition to the Ramah. The Ramah stands on his own. That shituf is not a problem. Okay, fine. Now, on the other hand, there are times when the Rebbe basically said, "What do you mean? That's usher. Christianity is usher for a guy." Here's two examples. In 1966, Rabbi Avram Hecht gave the invocation at the United States Senate. And if you look at his prayer is titled Avinu Shabashamayim Melech HaOlam, Father in Heaven, King of the Universe. But his words that he used were Sovereign of the Universe, Almighty God in Heaven. There is no translation for Father in Heaven. Well, the truth is, it used to say, he prepared his speech, it said, Sovereign of the Universe, Father in Heaven. And he sent it into the Rebbe. And the Rebbe told him to take out Father in Heaven. Here you have the Ksav Yad on the right. The Rebbe wrote, because of the Trinity, it is forbidden to use the term Father in Heaven, and the Rebbe quoted Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea. This is amazing. What Shulchan Aruch Yeridea in Kuf Mem Zayin says, look what it says, the Mechaber. You're not allowed to cause a guy to do a shvu in the name of Avodas Chavim. That's the Mechaber in Yeridea. Came along the Ramah and said, right? Pretty much. And the Alter Rebbe, now we know, also said, Comes the Rebbe and ignoring the Ramah and points the Mechaber to tell Avram Hecht that he shouldn't say in the Senate, Father in Heaven. So that sounds like you don't want the Christians thinking about their Father in Heaven because it's a problem for them. That sounds like it's the other direction. And then, in 1983, there was also a minor, during this same moment of silence, Mivsa, where Rabbi Weitzman from Brazil wrote to the Rebbe that he wants to do a moment of silence in Brazil, make a campaign. It was the same tkufa, right after the Sikha. So the Rebbe responded, Hem katulim kanoim v'yeshchashash sheyachrichu oisay ish v'dat. They are radical Christians, and there is the possibility that they will force into this the invocation of oisay ha'ish. Again, for a Christian, what's the problem? If shituf is mutter, then it's mutter. So what's happening here? Why do you have both directions? I don't know, but I do know this. It's a machlokes. At the end of the day, it's a machlokes. And it's a machlokes with serious implications. It's not like a small machlokes whether this product is kidneys or not kidneys. I'm not laughing at that. But this is a much bigger deal. And so, I don't have an answer. But I'm not surprised that on the one hand you'll see stuff on the Rebbe where there are very important values such as funding for Jewish schools or moments of silence where these are very, very important things. So the Rebbe is more noita to be mekel. On the other hand, it's not like complete heter. It's not complete heter. And you could change language. Change language. Why not? Change language so they're not thinking about it. And in a country like Brazil, I'm not entirely sure how to...
Depends on the type of people.
Exactly.
And the American people are very like, do whatever you want, however you want to do. In other places, they're going to say, we're going to give you a moment of silence, but
it's not. The different place is not enough. Both the minor about the Senate is in America, and the other thing is also in America. It's not just the different places. Yes, it is true the places are different, but I'm arguing is that you have two approaches in halacha, and we don't disregard any of them, and so I'm not surprised that therefore the Rebbe is using both.
Is it a problem? You said, with moment of silence, they could maybe think about Yishu, but when it gets to the Senate here, you're actually telling them to say it.
No, you say Father in heaven.
Yeah.
Father in heaven. And the Rebbe is quoting the Mechaber that the Ramah disagrees with.
I don't think the question is on why. The Rebbe could have said it's just it's not a sign. Don't say that. But he uses the
quotes of Shulchan Aruch.
I think the Rebbe thing.
Okay, let's go.
It's preposterous that this is a situation right here, Ma'aser B'Poel, in this situation. By better choice of language, you cover all bases, as he told
but the Rebbe wrote Osir. Osir li'ishtamesh b'bitui zeh. And that's mamish not the Ramah, and the Rebbe relies on the Ramah elsewhere. I'm not asking a question. I'm providing explanations. It seems like the people around the table don't like the explanation. My explanation is that there is Ramah, but there's good counter arguments for the Ramah, and so therefore we're going to find ourselves sometimes on either side of the fence. That's my approach to this. I don't have a neater explanation, though I do think there are other factors that are obviously important as well. Okay, let's do one more point over here. And that is as follows. The Rebbe quotes a chidah. The chidah, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, lived in the 1700s, and he gave us a gift. And that gift is, he wrote a travelogue of his travels, which is a diary. And so that's amazing. We have a Gadol Yisrael, someone who authored 40, 50 svarim, and we also have a lot of information about him. And so in one of the places he writes that he met a non-Jew, and he asked him, what do you believe? And the guy said, I investigated. In other words, I asked him questions. It turns out he taka believes in the one and only God. This is what you need to do. Interesting. You need to say Shema Yisrael morning and night, agoy. Tekayim sheva mitzvahs. V'tizoyer mishituf. B'chal oifen. Be very, very careful about shituf. Yichud gamal Hashem lekei Yisrael. The Kabul va'emar shelo yispal kim, and he agreed, and he said he's only going to daven lekei Yisrael. The Rebbe brings this. See, sheva mitzvahs v'nayach. How many dugmois do you have that you could invoke from Jewish history where a yid was doing sheva mitzvahs v'nayach? Very few. So the Rebbe quoted this. You see, a yid doing sheva mitzvahs v'nayach. What do we see here? That he's pulling the guy away from shituf. So the Chidah l'choira holds that shituf is not allowed. Now, but the Rebbe said the following, and not this sikha, but another sikha, and that's why we have to be careful before we make a conclusion about the Chidah. Because the Rebbe says like this: although there are some views that say their shituf is not a problem, it only means I need muzer at them, that they're not commanded. It's obvious as when they transcend and go past shituf, bis zu haben epis, a bissel, in achtes Hashem, that ain't the only God and only Him, is das moisif signs there, zehirus v'hidr bekim zayim mitzvah neinoich and alles there snivim. It's going to add in their how they're going to keep all the 7 mitzvahs neinoich, and signs that are also on their helping the Jews. You can understand helping the Jews because the more their belief is similar to the Jewish belief, so then the more open they'll be to helping Jews. But go back to the earlier point. The Rebbe here is introducing a new concept. There's Shav Mitzvah and then there's Hidr Mitzvah. Hidr Mitzvah. So just because, don't rely on the Ramah to say, the Goy is the Seder, I don't have to talk to him about Achtos Hashem. No. Everyone, it's only a Shaila in Asr Mutter, but everyone agrees that it's a lot better, so therefore, you should push Achtos Hashem. Okay. So, this is gives, I think, a little bit of a window into this reality where we sometimes have the question: Are the goyim around us Shavim? Are they Bnei Noach? Are they Noahites? Right. So it's a good conversation to have because sometimes the Rebbe often used the word that's Chsidei Umas Ha'olam. So that's the question: how can you be Chsidei Umas Ha'olam? God, you have God, you have to have belief in God. You have God, but if you're religious and you're messed up with Christianity, love that. It could be that it's not a problem. It doesn't mean it's ideal, but it could be, the deal could be that it's not a problem.
You see nowadays, how without Christianity, you're completely left. That's the thing.
You're saying the helping of Yidden you see today coming more from the
in Christianity.
Even Christianity is completed up. Is that saying Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas?
No, because let's remember this whole conversation. What a goy is allowed to do, but not for a Yid to get involved in that.
You could do it for Eva.
Okay, so saying Ahaba is a whole other subject. Let's just finish with one. I know I'm going a little over. One small vart is in the Maimonim. It always says, okay, so Shittuf is not allowed for a Yid. Okay, so the Pasha just say, okay, so I'm not going to look at a human being as a God. I'm not going to look at the sun as a God. So the Maimonim then say, yeah, but do you look at your work as a God? In other words, do you say, the Eibusher filled the Welt, but my work, right? That has, right? It has a certain degree of control over what I get and what I don't get. So that, as the Maimonim says, that's shittus. And that's what the Rebbe Marash does it, and the Rebbe Rashab does it. The attitude has to be, it's only a keli. It's kigarzim yad ha'chosed. Just like we all understand that the tool is nothing but the tool, and it's all about the person who's controlling the tool, so too, the whole concept of having a job and earning a parnasa is only a tool. And the second we look at it a little more than a tool, so then that's a shittuf that we need to, obviously it's not shittuf on a Avodah Zarah level mamish, but in terms of the way Chassidus wants us to look at the world, that's something to think about that results from this conversation. So anyway, this all comes back to the fact that we now have this new sif of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that seems to mirror very much what the Ramah was saying, and therefore it needs to be added into this conversation about the status of Christianity today.